Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Welcome to the Conference on World Affairs. It is Wednesday, April 9th. It is 10:30 a.m. This is panel number 18118, titled The Future of Civil Rights in Modern Society. Before we get started, I'm asked to reference the fact that we are here on indigenous people's land. Excuse me. There's a statement that you've probably heard if you've been to some of the other conferences. I have a slight variation on that. I want to speak to the Latin term tortuous interference. Lawyers use this to reference an illegal taking, tortuous interference. There's a saying that those who fail to study history are destined to repeat it. Tortuous interference. The white man took these lands. The indigenous peoples did not think they owned the lands. They didn't understand a taking of land. This is land that is here for all of us. And if we take care of Mother Earth, she will take care of us, shelter, food, water, and security. Torturous interference. Those who fail to study history are destined to repeat it. Ukraine, Panama, Greenland, Canada, tortuous interference. I am a stand-in, and I have had about 5 minutes notice to be the moderator, so I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves. First, silence your cell phones. Second, if you have questions, we have producers raised in the back of the room. If you raise your hand, they'll bring you a note card. I'll take the questions. I'll try to curate them. And if you are a student, write student. If you want to direct your question to a specific panelist, please indicate that. Otherwise, I'll try to curate that the best way possible. Santag, if you would first introduce yourself, and then we'll work through.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm super excited to be here. This is my first CAA, and thank you all for being here and for having us and curating this panel. My name is Satang Nabaneh. I'm a Gambian legal scholar, human rights practitioner, based in Dayton at the University of Dayton, but come from the global space where my work has really focused around global human rights activism, and I do look forward to engaging with our beautifully curated panel, especially with regard to the topic for today. So thank you again for being here.
Good morning, everybody. I said, good morning, everybody. Some of y'all were in the panel right before this, so you should know this already. My name is Wisdom Cole. I serve as the Senior National Director of Advocacy for the NAACP. I have been a civil rights organizer for the last decade, focused mostly on youth organizing. I touch economic justice, education inequalities, environmental climate justice, and this year criminal justice as well, as we are facing an onslaught of issues that are all connected to electoral politics. This is my 4th year at CWA, so I feel like I should be getting my degree in CWA, so whoever can do that, please let me know, at least an honorary. But I am excited to talk about the future of civil rights because what we are seeing right now with these attacks on DEI is truly an attack on civil rights itself. A lot of these things are masked and disguised as distractions, and so I want us to be able to talk about how we can see through the distractions, talk about the real issues that are at hand, forecast into the future, and determine what our 2025 is going to look like.
I love this panel already. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Schatz, and this is my first time at CWA and my first time in Boulder, and I already love this conference and, again, this panel, and I'm excited to someone asked earlier, what are you going to talk about? I was like, I don't know. I'm excited to see what comes out of my mouth, and I'm more excited to hear from all of you. I'm an author, so I come to this topic of civil rights as an author, someone who enthusiastically writes about history, lesser-known histories, feminist histories, anti-racist histories. I wrote a series of books for young readers about cool women from history. I wrote an anti-racist activity book for adults. I have a novel coming out about reproductive justice. So I think the common thread in my work across genres is writing about, again, exploring fascinating lesser-known histories and figuring out ways to get audiences who might not be enthusiastic about those topics to learn about them and engage. So in my books for young people, I use bright colors, I use illustrations, I make the stories really fun. Again, to address white supremacy and anti-racism for adults, I use cartoons, I use games, I use a lot of different techniques to get people engaged. So a lot of my work is also around speaking directly to white people about our role in anti-racist work and organizing. So I see a lot of white people out here today. I'm really happy to be in the minority as a white person on this panel. That's actually important to me when I'm on panels. So I'm happy to speak to particularly the role that we have, the urgent role that we have in this moment.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I was raised by my grandmama, so you got to give it back to me. Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Louis L. Reed. I'm not Lou Reed, the singer, so please don't ask me to carry a note. But my name is Louis L. Reed. Until recently, I was executive vice president of an organization called the Frederick Douglass Project for Justice. And prior to that, I've held several roles across the criminal justice reform space. And my claim to fame is that I, over the last 8 years or so, have been responsible for supporting and or leading policies that have been about 30 in total. And when you quantify that impact, we've been able to create a pathway to freedom for more than 500,000 people in this country who have been impacted by the criminal legal system. Thank you. So, and I don't have more degrees than a thermometer like how some of my co-panelists do. But one of the things that I often share with people is that as impressive as my resume may be and or my bio may be, in between the white space, what it doesn't show is that I did 14 years in federal prison. I usually like to pause for dramatic effect after I say that. I did 14 years in federal prison, and when I was incarcerated, that was the catalyst that actually instigated a notion that I'm probably going to be talking about during the course of our conversation. And that notion simply means that those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources and power. Let me say that one more time for the people in the back. Those closest to the problem are often closest to the solution, but furthest from resources and power. So I'm grateful to be here today, and hopefully I can return over the next 4 years and receive an honorary degree conferred to me by Professor Wisdom over here.
My name is David Backrack. I'm a stand-in. I was born the same year that CWA started, 1948, before there was television. This is my 25th CWA, 12th year moderating. So now I'm going to try to come up with some questions to get things started here. I grew up in the 50s and 60s and still growing up. Some people say not fast enough. There was a 34-year-old who stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, 34-year-old man. And he gave a speech that he had prepared the night before, and then he paused, and then he gave the speech that we all remember, because he started with, "I have a dream." So my question for the panelists is Martin Luther King's dream still alive, still healthy, and is it going to survive the current environment, and what can we do to help it? And we'll start with Santa.
Yeah.
I was like, where you want to start? No, thank you. Thanks. Yes, I mean, to the question and linking it to the broader theme of this panel, as I said, I come from a global perspective. My motivation has always been as a legally trained person. It has always been this idea of how to leverage international and regulatory framework, right, to ensure the full realization of civil rights, no matter your race, color, background, economic status, and so forth. So my work, the collaborative work that I do at the intersection of research, education, and activism has really been, I usually say that I do human rights activism across borders, right? Or, we have that framing around that. And to me, part of what that really motivates is a politics of solidarity. And that's really part of my interest as well, in terms of both, I think more critically, especially talking about the dream, as well as whether we can achieve that and whether it's possible within the current climate that we are in, is really also acknowledging that the challenges, the foundational crisis that we face, whether that's the climate crisis, the rise of authoritarian governance, the corporate, rise of corporate power, especially even within our own politics, is really around this idea of how do we then also center the voices of the affected communities as well. And so part of the work that I do, especially at the international level with the United Nations, is really trying to bring the narratives and centering the voices of people from affected communities, especially minority communities, whose human rights have been violated, but they usually do not have the space. So really in terms of amplifying and elevating that as well. And I do think part of the takeaway, especially as we think about the foundational crisis and the future of civil rights, is also acknowledging that these problems, as I said, they are not siloed. What happens in the US, obviously, whether similar or not, it really resonates with, someone from Little Gambia, where I am from, West Africa, just a line on a map with less than 3 million people, right? But also whether it's women or gender equality and the anti-rights movement that we see both globally, but also within the US context as well. So I think for me, and the way that I'm really approaching the issue is really, one, acknowledging that there are crises, but also really opportunities to leverage as well. And just before we started, Wisdom and I, we were talking about, digital innovations, right? Part of my work, especially supporting democratic transition, particularly within the African context, have really been seeing the sort of explosion of the use of digital innovations by the Gen Z, especially in Kenya last year with the Reject Finance bill, which shifted to Ruto Must Go, but also that we saw had ripple effects in Uganda, in Kenya, in Uganda, Nigeria, as well as Ghana as well. I mean, obviously, we can talk about the shortcomings and the challenges of the digital space as well. But I do think part of that is really also acknowledging that one, people care about democracy, that they are actively interested in mobilizing collectively to protect our democratic gains as well. But also acknowledging that trust between citizens and elected officials, trust between and within citizens is important. When that is not there, our political institutions crumble. Thank you.
To the question in terms of Martin Luther King's dream, I believe the dream is still alive, but I think the question that I am wrestling with is, will it survive the next decade? A lot of the things that I've been thinking about, particularly when it comes to civil rights, has been, I've been in a very reflective phase of what has brought us to our current political moment. I said I've been an organizer over the last decade, right? Thinking 2014 through 2024, right? You see the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, in Oakland, California. I was a part of a lot of the protests and movements that were shutting down the freeways after the murder of Mario Woods. There was a lot of incidents of racial hate happening in the Bay Area, and all across America. Young people were waking up to this fact, right? Really picking up the baton and wanting to further the ground, right? And even in 2020, during a global pandemic, there seemed to be this global, or at least conscious or awakening happening in America to the plight of what Black people were going through. And in that moment in time, I actually found myself very, very frustrated because within my career, within the work that I've done as an organizer and activist, we've been talking about this. We've been talking about the murder of Black bodies. We've been talking about the carceral state. We've been talking about the constant incarceration of Black and brown bodies in America. But America is finally waking up to it in this moment in time where we are seeing the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, the murder of Breonna Taylor. But someone told me to take light in the situation that people are actually waking up to this fact. And so I did. And it was great to see people shift the way they understood racism in America and their impact in it and taking a stand to do something more, right? We saw corporations give money to Black and brown organizations, even though it was pennies on the dollar. We saw a shift in our cultural programming, so to speak, where there were more diverse stories being told than ever, right? But in the matter of 4 years, we've done a complete 180. What does that tell us? That told us in a moment in time where we had an opportunity to seize power, we only took a slice and not the whole pie, right? What we're experiencing now when we see these attacks on DEI is really an attack on our civil rights. What do I mean by that? When I look at the people who are being most affected by the legislation that is being put into place, we are seeing an aggressive attack on our social safety nets, cuts to Social Security, cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, veteran benefits, right? For folks in the Black community, we are familiar with taking care of our elders, right? We got grandmas who stay in the living room, folks that we are supporting as they are in their last days of life, right? But because they have worked so hard, don't they deserve the money that was theirs? Don't they deserve the benefits for going out to fight in war? Don't they deserve all the things that we do deserve as Americans too? So I think that when we are thinking about the future of civil rights, we have to recognize, do we have the tools, technology, and the people in place to ensure that we're able to further this movement? The last thing I'll say is Farnand has this quote about each generation. It is an opportunity to understand its mission, accept it, or betray it. We're in a moment where we've been given a mission. We have clear enemies. We have clear legislation that is being put on us to keep us down. Are we going to accept this mission and fight at all costs to ensure that we're able to keep this dream alive?
I'm sorry, I'm just letting that sink in. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned being out there in Oakland at those protests. I was at the big protest in Oakland last weekend, and it felt so good to finally, I live in the Bay Area, and it felt so good to be back out in the streets with folks in Oakland, in the space where so much incredible organizing took place, in 2020 during the Black Lives Matter and before with Occupy Oakland. So it was one of the few moments where I've felt some like a spark of like collective energy. So I think maybe because I come to this as an author and a writer, my mind immediately kind of goes to metaphor, and I think about this idea of the dream, right? Because you wake up from a dream, right? The dream of equality, the dream of justice, the dream that Dr. King spoke about, that is still so resonant for us. But dreams don't last because we wake up, and sometimes I think that this particular moment of vicious, I would say fascist backlash that we're in is us waking up from a dream. And so how do we actually realize a dream, right? You have to wake up from it, and then you realize that it's actually very, very hard. And sometimes when I think about the experience, like what you spoke to, Wisdom, of kind of the larger American consciousness, and especially white folks kind of suddenly waking up in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and having this racial reckoning, and kind of companies and corporations rapidly putting into place DEI programs and concepts with a zero underpinning or understanding of what that actually means and what that work is built on. I think it's really hard. Organizing is hard. Change is hard, right? All of this work is incredibly difficult. And so I think for that reason, the dream is even more, I feel, it's essential that we keep it alive, but that we somehow transition from thinking about it as a dream and more as our lived reality and what we actually have to fight for in our waking life, and accept how hard that is and how disheartening that is. And the other thing I'd say when it comes to thinking about the civil, obviously with the title of our panel, I think for Americans, when we think of civil rights, we go to the 50s and 60s and we think of Dr. King. And I spend a lot of time in schools, elementary and middle schools, talking about this. And, it's as Chimamanda Adichie talks about, this danger of a single story, right? And one of the things I always talk to young people about is, Dr. King, his name, and he didn't do that alone, right? He wasn't up there by himself in 1963. He didn't organize that by himself. And it's collective. It was a mass movement of people. So part of reflecting on his speech too, and how we again wake up from the dream and do this work on a daily basis, is doing it in community with people and accepting that. We may not have a super charismatic leader at this moment, but we all actually do have a great deal of power in our daily lives, and accepting that and looking around and recognizing what other people in your community can bring to that work is, I think, essential for how we keep going.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. One of the things that I think about is that people love to quote Dr. King when they want to make dreaming sound safe. Mm-hmm. And dreaming, where I come from, in Black, brown, and poor white communities, has never been safe. When you think about Dr. King wasn't just a dreamer. Dr. King was a strategist. He was a disruptor. He was a threat to power. I want you to imagine something. Just walk down the corridors of time with me for a second and think about just 50 years ago, Dr. King was public enemy #1 in this country. Yet we celebrate him today as if he has always walked in between raindrops. And so for me, when I think about dreamers, the dream didn't die on the mountaintop the night before Dr. King was assassinated, when he gave a sermon at Bishop Mason's church. It didn't die at the mountaintop. When I think about dreamers, I think about people like Patrisse Cullors, who Wisdom had alluded to. She was the architect of the movement for Black Lives Matter. When I think about dreamers, I think about people like Desmond Meade, who had been justice impacted, who led the Florida Rights Coalition to make sure that people who had been justice impacted after they were locked out, after they had been locked up in carceral institutions, they were locked out of the right to vote. I think about people like Tarana Burke, who dreamed about a society where women wouldn't be exploited by men wielding their power over them, hence the rise of the Me Too movement. And so when I think about dreamers, I don't think about dreamers from the context exclusively as it relates to Dr. King being the sole proprietor of what it means to dream in this country. I think about people like myself. When I sat in a federal prison for 14 years and I thought about what it is that I was going to do in order to be able to disrupt this system. How was I going to come home, and how was I going to make sure that Black, brown, and poor white people were not going to be continually excessively prosecuted and disproportionately sentenced in our criminal legal system? And so when I think about dreamers, I think about dreamers not from the perspective going all the way back to 1963, 1964, during that volatility of the 60s. I think about what's happening now. Something that's as current as whatever is trending on TikTok right now that has gone viral. That's what I think about when I think about dreaming.
Thank you. Let me put two questions together here that were asked from the audience. And it has to do with what is being taught in the schools, what is being allowed to be taught in the schools, revisionist history, severe editing of reality, enculturating the next generation of students to a distorted reality and a less than fully honest reality. What is the impact? How do we reverse the curve that has been bent down, and reestablish open, honest dialogue and communication with our young people about where we were, where we are, and where we're going. You want to start? Sorry, you're to my left.
Yeah.
Anyone can. No, we're going to start with Louis because.
Gonna mix it up.
Yeah, I think that young people are a little bit more sophisticated than what we give them credit for.
Yes.
I think that when you look at an 8-year-old, we've gone from times where you use your great niece or nephew to program a remote. Now they're actually coding, right? They're a little bit more sophisticated than what we give them credit for, and they're far much more resilient than what it is that we assign to them. They're far much more observant than what we think that they're paying attention to. And so it doesn't matter, in my mind, it doesn't matter. So, I ethnically and culturally, I'm a black man. As light-skinned, as green eyes as I have, I'm a black man. And so I grew up in a time where in our culture, we have oral tradition. I was raised by my grandmother. And so I know about my family oral tradition, I know about societal oral tradition, et cetera. I don't care what it is that they implement in schools where they try to take something out or try to put something in. In my mind, you can't erase what has already been there, what has already been established. And so for me, yes, I do think that we need legislation. I do think that we need policies. Yes, I do think that we need to increase the fight in order to roll back how, I'm trying to be palatable when I say this because sometimes I can be a little bit revolutionary. The folks who are trying to erase us as a culture, erase us as a people, erase us as an identity. I do think that we need to be as aggressive in that. However, in my mind, when I lift the conversation up just a little bit further, it goes beyond what's in books. In my mind, we need to be thinking about not necessarily our history, but what about our destiny? What about our future? Oftentimes, I can say this as a black person, we have a tendency to be so caught up on history. I would trade 10 Black History Months for one Black Future Weekend. Because what's happening is that the people would love us to be focused exclusively on history and not necessarily be up to par with what's happening in coding, what's happening in technology, what's happening in other areas, and keep us focused on where we've been, not necessarily where we're going. I'm done.
I'm just writing that down. Yes. Damn. Have you said that before? Did you just come up with that?
That was extemporaneous.
That's just right now?
Yeah.
God damn. So good. So good. I think so much about, like, how do we simultaneously acknowledge how horrific what is happening right now is, and also hold it in the context of how horrific things have actually always been, right? Like, because so what I mean is that there are incredibly serious attacks across the country on public education, right? When we think about what civil rights, one of our basic civil rights is the right to a public education, a right to a free education, ideally a quality education, right? And across the country, yes, textbooks are being revised, history is being revised, the people are being deleted from government websites as if trans folks were not at Stonewall. I mean, right? Like, but at the same time, and this is very serious, but at the same time, the question presumes that hasn't always been happening, right? Like, it presumes that there was this time where kids in public schools were learning the full truth of American history, were learning a curriculum and reading books that reflected a diverse array of experiences and existences, right? I was that kid in my high school AP history class scowling at my teacher reading Howard Zinn in the back of the classroom because I knew that what I was being taught was nowhere near the full story. And so so again, there is so much that is being taken away right now, but it is, it's part of the playbook. And I think when part of this pushback that we're experiencing, the conservative movement, the MAGA movement, however we frame it and talk about it, they are many, many things. but I don't think they're creative, and I don't think they're innovative. And they are working from a playbook that they've been working from for centuries, really. And so it's interesting, too, when we think about looking to history, and I appreciate what you say about the obsession and focus with history and not looking forward. I think it's true. And I think that if anyone in this country is really enthusiastically looking to history right now, it is white people in power, because that history was better for them, for us. That was great, right? Make America Great Again is an historical slogan. It's rooted in history. It's rooted in that thing that we had back then is much better, and that's what we want to make. So I really appreciate this idea about not losing sight of looking forward. And I also really agree, kids are really savvy and really smart. And I don't think this generation is doomed at all. I think they're up against a lot. As all generations are. And again, your Farnand quote about the obligation of a generation, it's so resonant. And whew, yeah.
I think about, if you've been to one of my talks, I love quotes, I love proverbs, I love sayings. There's an African proverb that says, the hunt will always glorify the hunter until the lion tells its story, right? The lion has to tell its story. You know, we are in an age where it's important for us to be able to share our stories, and they are taking our words and using it against us. I've been thinking a lot about, 2011 to 2015, and there was this whole woke movement, right? Where this idea of like, are you woke? Do you understand what is happening in society? Are you hip to what is going on with oppression? Do you understand systemic racism? And this question, and it was a whole, it still is, and it was a whole movement. Like, people had woke T-shirts and jackets, and making this understanding. And they've taken our words, right, and said, Florida is an anti-woke state. We are not going to be teaching that woke stuff in our classrooms, right? That we will not be succumbing to diversity, equity, and inclusion, even though that was a word that was given to us. That we will not be subscribing to the LGBTQIA mentality in our classroom and not allowing children to share bathrooms, right? Creating these problems that really weren't even problems to begin with, right? Creating these issues that really weren't issues to begin with. As you said, Kate, right? They weren't giving us that education in the first place, right? A majority of my peers who are organizers and activists in the movement never even took an African American studies class. They read on their own. They got their education from their elders. They were born into movements. They, as we have time and time again, had to search for that knowledge because it was not given to us. And so as they are legislating it even more to forbid us from getting that, I think it's important for us to think about wraparound services and resources. How do we have organizations like the NAACP, like Black Student Unions, like MECHA, like Chale, like all these organizations that are really doing the work to give young people their sense of belonging and self? Because that's really what they are also attacking, is this idea that we are American too, that we also have a history that also started long even before America, but have had history or historians or figures who have empowered themselves by learning, by reading, by engaging, by building out their own narratives and carving out a path for them to build power in America. And so I think it's important for us to really think about what ways can we retain those resources, because those resources are also being attacked. There is a world in the future where a lot of these organizations or student organizations that support young people in the development of self no longer exist, right? And so it is up to our universities, it's up to our local legislators to demand diversity no matter what. What are we doing to protect the people who are in these positions, in these spaces and places, and give the opportunities for young people to dive into a deeper journey of self?
I should have gone first.
All right, next time.
No. I mean, I think, my fellow panelists have really dealt with the issue very comprehensively. I think my only small addition to that is that I come from a country that was colonized. And obviously, we were indoctrinated and educated in a language, in histories and cultures that were not our own, right? But obviously, in terms of oral history and tradition, as Louis already highlighted, right, we're able to showcase the alternative ways of building knowledge and building community as well, right? And so I think part of what I am really hearing from my fellow panelists as well is really this idea around storytelling and narrative, right? And I mean, I really connect to, Wisdom, your point about the sense of belonging. I interact with especially students in a predominantly white institution, right? And recently, or a couple of years ago, we actually did a conference on decolonization and development for African people of African descent. And part of part of the panel that we had, the student panel, was really around the idea around belonging as a theme, both in relation to how they engage with the diaspora, but also even within communities where we have an ODI office, there are certain policies and institutional services in place even within established institutions, right? But students feeling like they do not belong. I think that is part of where our energy should lie. I mean, as a legal person, obviously, I'll turn to legislation and policies. I think those are always important, right? But I do think the times that we find ourselves as well require the documentation of not just the sort of the garden of decay, right, around democratic backsliding, right, but also how communities are coming together and building new grammars of organizing, right. In that way as well, we can document that as well. And I do think, especially when we think about the power of young people, I greatly believe in that power. I started as a child activist in the Gambia when I was 8 years old. I could remember when I was about 12, I was supposed to give a statement at some conference for children's rights, but my name wasn't on the table, right? But it was a children's rights event. I went and sat at the high table because I'm giving a speech. This is our event, right? And one of the organizers actually asked me to not sit there, and I said no. Why are you organizing a program for children, for young people, when our voices and our presence are not centered? So I think that whole idea around tokenism as well should, as we think about the times that we're in and how we address that, really ensuring that we're seeing people, we're seeing affected communities, we're amplifying and elevating their voices and their lived experiences within the conversations that we find ourselves, but even as we think about strategies and whether those are legislation, policies, and services as well. Thank you.
This program is titled The Future of Civil Rights in Modern Society. I'm not sure what modern. I'll say contemporary society. Of course, like any organization, structure, enterprise, the future is built on the foundation of the past. And I'll just introduce the word constitution as a word that some people understand, some people don't. The question was raised, what can we do in the face of all of these horrifying illegal deportations, the threat of martial law and the White House floating deporting U.S. citizens, dissent becoming illegal in this fascist regime? So civil rights of citizens and residents who are here legally being violated without regard, using legal maneuvering of emergency powers, and yet members of Congress and our citizens are not standing up and expressing enough outrage to slow this down. It's only been 75 days or so, but there is no time. I was going to say there's time for this to correct itself, but that time was on January 22nd. Who would like to go first?
I'll take a stab at that. So in full disclosure, I've worked across 4 different presidential administrations, and the 1.0 version of this current administration I worked with to pass a bill called the First Step Act. That bill to date has released more than 50,000 people from federal prison. And the work that we did, this is an unshameless plug, the work that we did around that bill is documented on you can actually watch it on Amazon in a film called The First Step. The reason why I bring that up is because the question around immigration, the question around what's happening currently with people being deported, et cetera, that is a question that is inextricably tied to our criminal legal system. Let me say that one more time. That is a question that is inextricably tied to our criminal legal system. Oftentimes we say to ourselves, well, I don't want to get involved. I don't want to, I shouldn't have to get involved in what's happening and who's going to be the prosecutor, what judges are going to be appointed, et cetera, because I always cross on the green and not in between. However, the very same people who are making decisions that are going to affect folks in your very community are the people that you're not voting for. The most powerful person in a courtroom is not a judge. The most powerful person in a courtroom is a prosecutor. The state's attorney controls the charges. The judge controls the time. And so when we think about deportation, et cetera, I know that that is an issue in and of itself. However, largely, there are more than 70 million people in this country who got criminal histories, who've been locked out of opportunities. So for me, when I think about the future of civil rights, it's not a singular strategy. It's actually, it's a convergence. I think that we need legislation that ends exclusion. I think that we need technology that builds access. I think that we need organizing that moves power. And last but not least, I think that we need narratives that shift public perception. If it was someone who looked like you in this room that was being deported, whose rights were being infringed on, there would be an uproar in this community. But because they don't look like us, because they don't sound like us, because they sit on panels with a hat on and that might not fit the decorum, we have a tendency to turn a blind eye. And we like to be armchair quarterback activists. And we like to talk about the outrage, but we're not really moving outcomes. We're more concerned about outrage than we are about outcomes. Outcomes are going to require you to show up at your local city council meetings. Outcomes are going to require you to write to your legislator. Outcomes are going to require you to get on a bus to go to your capital to say enough is enough. Outcomes are going to require you to, vote. And not just in a national election, voting locally. And so when I think about the issue of people who don't look like us, who don't sound like us, who may have menial jobs, that's code. When I think about those individuals, the reason why we have a power structure that's able to get away with the things that they are able to get away with is because people like us aren't necessarily doing anything to stop them.
So to build on that, the kind of micro of what people can do, right? And I think a lot of folks feel really powerless, right? This isn't, if what we're talking about up here are things that are concerning to you, you most likely feel very powerless. And the truth is that right now, you cannot do anything right now in this moment to stop these deportations, right? Like that's just like, so sometimes I think when we think about what do we do? How do we actually affect change? What can I actually do, right? Getting realistic with that is really helpful. I'm a Virgo. I'm really practical. I like, well, okay, what are we gonna do? What can we actually do? One of the things I talk about a lot is how do you just make these feelings and this outrage visible in your community, right? I mean, there are things there, you may not be able to stop these deportations, bring back these innocent folks who have been stolen and kidnapped and sent to, it's unbelievable, right? But very believable at the same time. So, I have a t-shirt. I buy a lot of angry t-shirts on the internet, and I wear them publicly. So yesterday I was wearing a t-shirt that says, "Immigrants are not criminals, but the president is." And I'll tell you that I was a little concerned about wearing that here, and I had a moment of, is that too much? I don't want to offend anybody. But what I get when I wear that T-shirt
You did
is
say this is your first time in Boulder.
well, it's true. But I also wear it on the airplane, right? And I wear that shirt because for me, I think a lot about how do I, I have a lot of privilege as this white cis woman walking through the world, looking like I do, getting access to being up in places like this. So part of what I do, I will wear the T-shirt. You know, what do I risk? I might risk someone getting mad at me, but what I also do is that people see that and they feel seen. And so the feedback I get from people who are like, thank you for wearing that shirt. Wow, thank you for wearing that. Like that's meaningful. Does it change? Does it affect legislation? Not necessarily, but put a sign in your yard, get a T-shirt, wear a button, you know, and like you said, like show up in your local community. What organizations already exist here in Boulder, in Denver, where you live, that have been doing this work for years, right? Again, to go back to what you said at the beginning, that the folks who are most marginalized and most impacted are the closest to the solutions, but the farthest from the money and power. Did I just quote you directly? Yeah. Yes, yeah. But there are organizations out there. Find those organizations. How can you plug in, right? What is happening here immediately in your neighborhood, in your community, right? There are absolutely people in this community, in your neighborhood, probably working in your workplace, cleaning the schools, right? Like there are people here who are afraid of deportation right now. What can you do both to help impact keeping them safe, right? Showing up to organizations, plugging in, but what can you actually do on a daily human basis to show your solidarity and your support to people? And again, I know not everybody's gonna go wear a T-shirt, but there are ways that you can make that support visible. And I think that it actually, in a time like this, when people are living with so much fear, that it can actually be pretty meaningful.
What I'll add, I think everything was really said, and I appreciate my colleagues on this panel for sharing so much insight and wisdom. Quick question to the audience. Raise your hand in the last year, have you gone to visit your member of Congress in district? We got a couple hands? We got a couple hands? Okay. Yeah, you get contact with them? Anybody done a phone call? Anybody send an email? Good deal, good deal, good deal.
Anybody write a postcard? People love postcards. Okay.
Right. I asked that question because in this moment in time, relationships are really important. And we have to build back our arm of advocacy. I think the last 4 years, to be honest, we've been really lazy. We've been really saying, hey, we have this democratic institution here that is willing to have the conversations with us and willing for us to go back and forth. So maybe we don't have to make those calls. Maybe we don't have to be in those meetings. Maybe we don't have to consistently put our demands on the forefront. And what we're realizing right now in this moment in time, the people who perceive to be our allies may not actually be our friends, may not actually vote in our best interests, may not actually care about the issues that we care about the most, even though we put them in place, right? I emphasize this because we have to build that muscle back up again, right? We have to, sometimes it feels so daunting. I know for maybe some of the younger people in the room who may have not had those experiences, our legislators work for us, right? For those who have had those experiences, we have to be consistent and dedicated to it, right? When these bills come up time and time again, we have to make those calls. We have to send those emails. We have to send those postcards. We have to have those meetings, right? We have to consistently let our people who are in office know what our priorities is. If we do not, they will make decisions on their own, or they will be swayed to do so by dark money and politics. It's important for us to maintain and retain those relationships, because when they do step out of line, as Brother Lou said, we have to vote them out. Or better yet, we may have to run for something.
Yes.
We may have to be the people in place. As June Jordan said, we are the ones we've been waiting for. The future of civil rights looks like us jumping into those positions. Looks like Gen Z Deja Fox out of Arizona running for Congress. Looks like Maxwell Frost, who is the youngest congressional member in Congress right now, out of Florida. It looks like younger people taking up those positions and people maintaining and retaining what type of decisions are made in the halls of power.
Just on that last point, I think it just calls on all of us that our resistance to oppression should not just be about resistance, but should also be about the type of movements that we want to build and see, right? And so very practically as well, I mean, I live in Ohio, and Ohio has been in the news for a while, with especially immigrant communities, the Haitian community, as well as others. So recently, at the beginning of the year, we actually put together an immigration justice summit, right? And part of it was really in terms of the fact that folks from immigrant communities, as said, are anxious, right? They do want to be in spaces where they can share information, where they can build support, but also build community as well, right? So part of what we did was the Knowing Your Rights training, for instance, but I think the bigger part is not just about sharing with them access and resources to information, but showing up that we do care, right? And it reminds me about this idea, this African philosophy idea around Ubuntu, which is about I am because we are, right? That my humanity is inextricably linked to yours. When I dehumanize you, I dehumanize myself. And so part of really showcasing to our immigrant communities, which I am part of, I mean, I came to the US because I lived under a dictatorship for majority of my life. The US provided that safe haven to be here as a human rights activist, right? But also obviously acknowledging that as an immigrant, that comes with its own, requirements and limitations and things like that. But really in terms of trying to be part of the community, but also seeing my community members as well, right? Showcasing to immigrant communities that they do care and that they do show up in whatever way that is possible.
Thank you.
It looks like you have a lot of questions.
I have a lot of questions, and I had one that I was going to ask, and now I'm going to ask it. So the current administration has been very effective in their messaging. What concise messaging do you think would be effective to wake people up on the dangers to our democracy? So it's a question of messaging.
I can quickly go first.
Yeah.
I think one, as I said in the beginning, I think one of the approach is really acknowledging that this is not just a U.S. problem. We know that when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold, right? So whilst obviously we're thinking about problems in our backyards, right, that it resonates with what is happening globally, whether that's in the global south or other parts of the global north in that sense. But I think in terms of messaging is really around how we build solidarity and collaboration across issues, across organizations, and across approaches as well.
I would say, I don't know if it's about, this is something I'm wrestling with, right? Because we pay thousands, almost millions of dollars into messaging research for all those text messages you get during electoral seasons and all the messaging and ads you see there. But I don't think it's really about the message. It's more so about the messenger, right? Who are the people in your community? I'm a big proponent of micro-influencers, right? It's not about the celebrity person who's saying, go vote. It's not about this massive DJ having a party saying, go vote. It's about somebody who can talk to you about the issues that are most important to you, right? It's about your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, your sisters, your cousins, the people you see at the grocery store, the people you see in your dorm hallway, the people you see at the cafeteria, in your auditorium. The people who are connected to you have more power to move you than just a message, right? They can speak to you from a place of understanding, a place of what's going on in your lived reality. There was a gentleman here earlier who was talking to me after the last panel, and he was talking about the lack of brown people who were here at this conference, because right now they're all working, right? Cleaning, working the fields, doing all that. Right? How are we giving access and opportunity for them to have that discussion and to be present in these places and spaces? The importance of the messenger will go a lot further, right? Someone talked about earlier in my last panel, most people don't open their door. Well, if I know you, if you're my neighbor, if you're somebody that's in my community, I'm opening the door for you to have this conversation.
I mentioned my love of signs and stickers and T-shirts, and I always like a kind of like punk approach to this. So a good friend of mine just made thousands of stickers that just say Trump and Musk don't care about you. And he's been mailing them to people around the country, and they've been sticking them everywhere. And I'm like, that's a concise message. I like that. But I think in terms of a concise message, the thing I keep thinking about is to go back to the classic protest song, Which Side Are You On? I mean, I think that, not everybody loves this, but there's some clear sides right now. And I think there always have been. And I think that I was talking last night to some folks who are on, they're going to be on a panel about fact and truth and how do we navigate that in these times. And I was like, I think it's important to remind people that there actually some things just are true and some things are wrong. And I think that we get really gaslit into questioning our morals and our ethics, and that I think there's some pretty clear sides right now. And so I think, I'm going to go with what side are you on?
I wrote down two things as both Kate and Wisdom were speaking. I wrote down the word playbook and I wrote down the word complacency. I don't want to infer that the issue that we are currently facing right now is exclusively Republican. Because I personally believe that Republicans at their best believe in liberty. I also believe that Democrats at their best believe in justice. And all of us as Americans at our best should believe in liberty and justice for all people, not some people, but for all people. And when I think about messaging, I'm thinking about one of several things. Number one, Wisdom alluded to it, credible messengers. If you wanted your hair cut, or if you wanted a recipe, you are more likely going to accept a referral from someone you know than someone that you don't know, because the messenger is someone that you consider credible. And I think that over the last 4 years, going back to the point of complacency, over the last 4 years, we've become complacent. We are responsible for where we are right now. It's not a Republican issue. It's not we are responsible for where we are right now. Over the last 4 years, we have become complacent. And I think that you need a version of a Freddy Krueger, whether it's in the likeness of who currently sits in the Oval Office or who currently sits as the chair of whatever committee in Congress who might hold a degree of power. You always need someone in a production, in a drama, who's going to emerge as a villain. Every David needs a Goliath. Every David needs a Goliath. And so we need these Goliaths just as much as we need Davids. And I think for me, the larger question is, how are we going to develop a playbook where we're going to slay the next Goliath and not necessarily be reactive, but be proactive about what our tools of engagement are going to be? Because whether it's Trump, whether it's Tom Cotton, whether it's someone else, those are just two people who I'm not particularly fond of. I got to manage my triggers. I'll talk to my therapist afterwards. But in any event, no matter who the person is that you disagree with, on the right or on the left, the fact of the matter is that how are you going to prepare for the next version of that person? Because last I checked, going back to the Freddy Krueger analogy that I gave, last I checked, there was about 13 installments of Nightmare on Elm Street. You thought that you killed him in the first one, and then here he comes popping up again. So there will be someone who's going to pop up again. What is going to be our playbook on how we're going to slay that Goliath? How we're going to kill this person or these policies once and for all?
Let me ask you this: Are we fighting Trump or MAGA?
I think that we are fighting really a combination of not exclusively Trump or MAGA. I think that we're fighting the worst of what we haven't killed long before Trump. This goes back to, I mean, brother, you know this, right? I know that you asked the question rhetorically. but I mean, we talked about the civil rights era. And you think about LBJ, right? LBJ used the N-word in the White House more than a little bit. He was an open bigot. And in my grandmother's generation, he was the worst thing that ever happened to black folks. However, we survived it. And so I don't think that necessarily we're fighting Trump or MAGA. I think that we're fighting systemic institutional racism. I think that we're fighting systemic institutional bigotry. I think that we're fighting systemic institutional sexism that happens to be manifested in a red and white hat, or happens to be manifested in the Oval Office currently. But we're still fighting it. When you had a Democrat that was in the White House, we were still fighting institutional racism. What we passed in the First Step Act, that was years of what Joe Biden had done under the Clinton administration during the 1994 crime bill. That was passed during when the Democrats were in power. My cousins were incarcerated. Both of my parents were incarcerated. And so when you think about this, this is not exclusively a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. This is our issue. This is our issue. And how are we going to, in effect, fight these issues? How are we going to fight them intelligently? How are we going to fight them strategically? How are we going to fight them intentionally? And more importantly, how are we going to fight them with spirit and heart?
You hit on a question that I was going to ask next, and it was about the mass incarceration of black and brown people. And I wrote down Reagan era, Clinton era. So I think you've addressed that.
Wait, but it was even before Reagan and Clinton. It went back to the Nixon era, right? The war on drugs was code for the war on black people. Right. It's purpose by design that in 1978 or so, the total prison population in the United States of America was about 200,000 maximum in jails and in prisons. And now to date, when you look at the census, depending on who's conducting what, it's approximately 2 million people. So that we incarcerate more people in this country. The United States of America is 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate 25% of our citizens. That is something that is absolutely asinine and should be. Oh, I almost cussed. You cussed for me in your mind, but
it should be fixed.
Yeah, it should be fixed. Yes.
Yeah. So what steps do you see that can help create a beloved community? So we're going to change the tenor of the discussion a little bit. A beloved community. I mean, we've heard things like the golden rule. Mm-hmm. And there is a new golden rule now. He who has the gold rules, right? But the original golden rule about brotherly love and taking care of one another and reaching out and reaching down and pulling up people up.
Jesus says something, and I'm not going to take you to church this morning, but Jesus says something that I think is a transferable principle. Yeah. Jesus talked about the least of these in society. And someone had the nerve, someone who's probably Princeton educated at the time, someone who probably had more degrees than the thermometer at the time. They probably had, they said, who is my neighbor? And Jesus began to tell a story about someone who had been marginalized in society, someone who had been overlooked and undervalued, someone who had been locked out of opportunities. And Jesus said, on the day of judgment, after we breathe our last breath and we get on to the other side, we won't be evaluated as to whether or not if we've gone viral on social media, if whether or not you made the best banana bread in the community. He said, we won't be evaluated by that. He said, what we're going to be evaluated by is what did you do when you saw those who were least of these in society? The least of these in society were those who were incarcerated. Did you visit them? When you saw widows, when you saw people who couldn't take care of themselves, when you saw people who were being deported, what did you do? What did you do with that? How did you move your spirit into action to be able to help those individuals? And so when I think about community, the golden rule still stands just as current to me as it was in days of antiquity. When I see people who are hurting, how am I going to respond to that hurt? Even if that hurt doesn't look like me, it doesn't sound like me, it doesn't come from my community. The fact of the matter is when Dr. King talked, he quoted John Donne, the great philosopher. He said, all of life is interconnected, and no man is an island unto himself. What indirectly affects one directly affects somebody else and vice versa. And so my community is here in Boulder, just like your community should be in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Satang, do you want to go next so that you're not last this time?
Go ahead.
You sure? Okay. I mean, I think that I really appreciate that question, and I'm glad that we can kind of pivot to that, right? This idea of beloved community, because that's what we've got, right? And I think, showing up is so important. It's how do you show up for people? What skills do you have, right? Like, what skills do you have that you already have, right? And where in your community do you wield power and influence? And by power and influence, I don't mean like power like you're in charge, right? But we all, in various ways, have influence on others and have a stature in our community. Sometimes it's as a parent, sometimes it's as a grandparent, as a teacher, maybe you're a supervisor at work, right? Maybe you're a leader in your church. So how can you show up in those communities? Think about what your skills are, right? Are you an attorney? Can you make really good banana bread, right? Like I can't, no one wants to eat my banana bread, but like, if you're really good at it, put it on a neighbor's doorstep. I mean, I talk about this also as a parent. I have 3 kids, 12 and 16, and I'm raising tweens and teenagers in this time, and I talk to them a lot about just what it means to kind of show up and be human and be kind. And at the risk of sounding too much like a hippie, but that's what I come from, that's what my parents are and were, that means a lot. And I think about modeling as well. So I know that when my kids see me, I buy packs of socks at Target when I'm running my errands, and I keep them in the car so that when we see unhoused people in our community at a stoplight and they're asking for, if I don't have food, I don't have cash, but I give them some clean socks. Just something that I keep in my car. I've always done that. And my kids see that, right? And that really matters for them. And I think it makes an impact, and they see what it means to just show up for other people, right? There's someone outside of the grocery store, asking for food, asking for money. And I say, what, can I get you some lunch? I go in, I buy them lunch, I bring them lunch afterwards, and my kids see that, right? So how can you, whether it's your kids or other people that you have, can model for in your community, what kind of acts of just basic decency and goodness can you do? Because that's, to me, so when I said, what side are you on, I wanted to clarify, I don't mean Democrat or Republican. I don't mean liberal or conservative. I mean goodness and kindness, right? Like, I care about other people, like, who don't look like me. I want my kids to know that everybody matters. I care about everyone's dignity and everyone's rights. And there are ways that we can, again, I cannot stop these deportations, but I can show my kids and other people in my community how to just show up and, create that beloved community.
Powerful. Since I'm a little different from the panel, a friend of mine said to me, don't get caught up so much in this world of cancellation that we don't leave room for redemption. Amen. Right? In the movement space, for quite some time, there's been this exclusionary kind of feeling of you're either in or you're out. You either understand or you don't understand, right? And I get people protecting themselves. I get people protecting their energy. I get people protecting their community. But for those who do have the capacity to do so, right, an organization out of Florida called Dream Defenders has this campaign called Freedom Needs Fighters. The reason why we are in this situation is because we do not have enough people. We do not have enough fighters for freedom who are a part of our movement and letting us know that we need to continue to grow that. And so part of what we have to do is continue to bring more people into our movement and ensure that they are part of the places and spaces that we operate in.
So people in Boulder know that the atomic clock by which all clocks are set is just down the street at the NIST National Lab, and the atomic clock says we have to close now. Thank you, panelists.